Hello, welcome to my presentation, Audit Your Theme. The slides are available on the MidCamp session page, so if you want to download and follow along, great, or grab them afterward. My name's Andrew Olson. I go by Andy. I'm a front-end developer from the Chicago suburbs. I work for a company called Bounteous. We have offices around the country. We're often hiring, so if you are interested, come talk to me. We also have a table out there. I've been working with Drupal since 2008. Fun fact about me, I'm a musician and I played in a band at Lollapalooza. So today, the agenda is we're going to talk about how to analyze your theme. We're going to look at the theme folder and look at theme files just to get a tour of your theme. I'm going to demonstrate some helpful tools that are going to help you with analysis of your CSS. I'm going to provide some REFACTOR pro tips, and finally I'm going to discuss a way to measure over time the size of your theme. So why did you decide to attend this presentation? Perhaps you fall into one of the following buckets. The first bucket is perhaps your theme has grown over time. On the screen you see a wheelbarrow that contains 4 buckets full of delicious cherries, right? Maybe when you first started out with your site and your theme, you just had that one bucket full of cherries, and then you had an integration, you had another site, you had something else go on, and by the end you have this really heavy wheelbarrow. So perhaps that's one of the reasons you're here to audit your theme. The next one is a really fun bucket. The launch is complete. You know, there's some nice on the screen. There's a icy bucket with tasty beverages in there. You know, perhaps though at the end of the launch you had to consume a few of those beverages and compromise along the way. And after launch is maybe a really good time after celebrating your successes to look back at your theme. Perhaps you're stuck with it. On the screen there's a cat. It's not too happy about being in the bucket. So you might have inherited a project and you really want to understand what's going on inside your theme. It's a big project. On the screen there's a waterfall and there's 4 kids with buckets throwing water at each other. There's a lot of front-enders on this project. And you really got to understand the lay of the land and set up some rules. Final bucket, perhaps you're new to theming. On the screen there's a baby in this little bucket and he's playing with water. So regardless of whichever bucket you're in, let's begin. So again, we're going to talk about how to analyze your theme, questions to ask yourself, and ultimately after we inspect all these theme files, what you're going to do is take some mental notes and actual notes as you audit it, and ultimately all the audit is going to lead to action. So the first thing that you're going to want to look at is your theme info.yaml file. That right away is going to tell you what type of theme you have, whether it's a sub-theme or a parent theme. On the screen, you're seeing an info file for a project that's a D8 project that's using the Zerb Foundation as the base theme, and it's a sub-theme on top of that. So as soon as I see that it's a Zerb Foundation theme, and if I'm new to this project, I probably want to go out to Drupal.org and see, oh, are there any fixes? Has this theme been patched? Is there any enhancements to it? Another thing too, if it's a theme you're not familiar with, is it still being actively maintained? What's the kind of activity and support that's going on? So again, just by looking at this file, it's going to tell you quite a bit. Another thing on the screen here, I don't think it's working. That's okay. Down at the bottom there's component libraries. So right away, just by looking at this file, I see that there's a Pattern Lab instance going on. So I can get a good idea of where my other theme files. It's a little bit more complex in this case. So the next file I suggest looking at is your libraries file. So in your themes, it's really going to tell you what's going on with loading your CSS and your JS appropriately. Again, are you using a front-end framework, so like Zerb Foundation or Bootstrap, just so you can get an idea of what's going on? Is there some sort of JavaScript complexity going on in this file? So the whole point of this is just to get a lay of the land and understand kind of the hot areas of the theme that you're working on. Another thing is web fonts. Are you hosting them or is it an external dependency? So right here on the screen, you're seeing a library's example file, and at the bottom, it's a little hard to see, but we're inheriting we're going out to Google and using a Google font. Maybe you want to change that. The next file to look at is your theme.theme file. This will give you a good idea to look at your hooks. How many template overrides are you really looking at? This is a good gauge to how complex and how many overrides are going on, and just get a good idea of the complexity. Your theme.breakpoints YAML. So are you using the responsive image module? If so, this is a great way to see your screen sizes. And if you aren't using the responsive image modules, this might be a really good time as you're auditing to implement that to really optimize your mobile experience. So you're going to want to ask yourself some of these questions. Again, we've looked at some files, now let's just kind of look at the directory. So is your site using automation? Are you using Gulp? Are you using Grunt? Perhaps Yarn? Is your site using SASS or less? I'm partial to SASS, and on a lot of the projects have been using SASS. Does your site use a pattern library? Later today, Brian Perry is going to be talking about using an external design system with Pattern Lab. Definitely check that out. But again, you just want to understand your theme and what those external dependencies possibly are. More folders that you're going to look into is how many templates that you have. How are they organized? Are all your templates in one folder, or do they have subfolders? So Classy has multiple folders. Bartik just has one folder for all the template files. How many different content types do you have on your site? Again, we're really trying to tease out complexity and get a real good understanding of what you're theming on the site. Lastly, is your site using the asset injector? So you might look at a page and you're saying, where are these styles coming from? The asset injector can be a great thing, but it can also be pretty disorienting when you're looking at styling and theming your site. Formerly in D7 was the CSS injector and the JS injector. Personally, I like that module out in production because it's a great way to get fixes out quickly. But for every rule you write with this asset injector, you really need to go back to your theme and enhance your theme. It's just a really quick fix. You should not be theming in the asset injector module. So now that we've gone through the theme files and we have a better understanding of the theme, let's take a step back and look at the project. So does your site have analytics? Maybe you built the site like 3 or 4 years ago. What kind of browser support is happening today? What are your top 20 most requested URLs? How much mobile traffic are you receiving? And that'll really help you optimize and use the tools that we're going to go through next. Another thing that I like to do is if you inherit a project and the original developer is available, ask them questions. After you get a good feel for what's going on in the theme, ask them to navigate the site with specific tasks, and they're going to tell you amazing stories along the way that you would never anticipate. Definitely listen to what they say. Don't lead them to what you think is going on, because it's a great opportunity to just kind of interview and have them navigate the site, and you get a good feel for what's going on in the site, and again, how you can optimize your theme. And of course, review your findings with them. And all these things, as you audited, and you came up with these good incentives, like maybe I should add the breakpoint module, or this content type looks completely dead, all that's going to lead to action. And so what I'm going to go over next are some tools that are going to really help you size up your CSS. And I'm going to first talk about Parker. Parker is a style sheet analysis tool, and it runs metrics on your style sheets and reports on their complexity. Again, the slides are out on the MidCamp site. Definitely go out there. These links can go directly there. But what you do is you go to the GitHub repository, clone it, install with npm locally, and you can either measure local CSS files or point it to remote CSS files. And it's a really great tool. We're going to look at the output of it. But what's great is it outputs JSON. And I'm going to get to that later about how to measure over time. So you download it, install it, point it to a file, and this is what the JSON looks like. So as you can see, in this case, I just compile all my SASS into one CSS file. This this theme was using the Zerp Foundation. You can see the style sheet size is 192K. And then the next things that it has are, gives you a number for rules, selectors, identifiers, and declarations. I don't know about you, but when I first saw this in JSON, I'm like, what are those again? So let's have a quick CSS 101 here. So everything here is a CSS rule. The H1 is the selector. The color is the property. And the value is the hex value. And those together make a declaration. So now having that little helpful graphic up in the top right explaining it tells you that there's 1,500 total rules in the style sheet. It has about 2,000 selectors. And next up we're going to talk about identifiers. So identifiers are not IDs. They're the measure of parts per selector. And I have some examples up on the screen here. Again, the first one is just a class that's one identifier all the way down to the last one of 5 identifiers. So that's what that number is telling you. So, and then obviously declarations, that's a count there. So really, what do these numbers mean? Your mileage really might vary, but the next set of output from Parker is really going to help us provide more insight into what's going on. So the next set talks about selectors per rule. Again, just leaving that graphic in the top right. That number is, you're going to want selectors per rule to be as close to 1 as possible. So lots of selectors per rule suggests that we're applying the exact same declaration or styles to a number of different selectors. If that's the case, then we could probably create a single catch-all selector that handles all the cases, which would make our CSS smaller and abstract patterns into more reusable selectors. Let's take a look at an example. So on the left, we have a lot of selectors, right? But really what that is doing is it's just styling a form element. So what we can do is write it into one class. We're reducing a lot of our selectors, and for all we have to do is just add this class to any one of those inputs or text areas. So right there we've reduced the size, and we're heading ourselves towards writing reusable CSS to get the most out of it. So again, selectors per rule, we want as 1. Next, your identifiers per selector should be between 1 and 2. Anything higher than 2 means that we're being really specific with that CSS rule. So therefore, we're limiting the ability to reuse our styles. So remember, identifiers are not IDs. It's the measure of the parts of the selector. So the next thing I want to talk about is specificity. It's a very hard word to say. I practiced all night. Specificity. So let's take a small refresher into what specificity is for CSS. It's going to help us determine what that rule is. So for a refresher, you can generally read the values on the screen from left to right and think of them as a number. So an inline attribute is going to be the most specific, and then elements are the least. So obviously 1,000 is going to be higher and win over something that's 100. Let's look at some quick examples. So this is an inline style. It's got 1, so it's 1,000. In this case, we have 1 ID, 1 class, and 3 elements, so it's not as strong. One thing to keep in mind is this isn't base 10 rules, so you could have 0, 1, 10, 3, but overall, this is a good way to see how specific things are. Lastly, universal selector is just neutral, so it's all 0, and important automatically wins. So whenever you have an important, that's always going to win, and if it's the last important, that's always going to win. And that's the great thing about Parker is it'll count how many importance you have. We'll get to that screen here in a second. But really, so the specificity, as I've been talking about this, you want to write a class-based theme and get the most reuse out of it. So that value should be as close to 10 as possible. If it's larger than 10, it means we're writing really specific CSS. And again, there's no guiding principles to this. Perhaps you have something in a certain part of the page and you want to contain it in an ID and make it really specific to control that, like UL lists. You want them to be inline in a certain region. So again, it's just a general rule of thumb, but when you're looking at styling and writing CSS, you want to make it as reusable and as flat as possible. And what's great about this tool is these values help guide you along the way. Total IDs should be close to 0 because IDs, you can only have 1 on the page. So you're, again, being really specific with it. So ideally, IDs, you want to not have as many IDs. You want to write a class and make it reusable. As I said, the total important keywords, it counts however many times importance are in there. Again, I'm using the Zurb Foundation framework and some other things, but this tells me I should probably understand how come there's 113 importance in my CSS file. Audit leads to action. You just go, that smells a little funny. These reports are great, and again, over time, it outputs JSON. You can see how things grow and improve. The other great thing I love about Parker is it spits out the total media queries, and so you just get a listing right away of all the media queries. It's a great, great quick tool. The other great thing it does is it spits out all the unique colors, so you can inspect this, and then if you're writing SASS, you can beat a stick at your UX people for making 50 different reds or blues, reel it in, write a variable, it's all right there. So Parker, I think, is a really great tool. What I really like it for is measuring the size of your CSS files. That's something that's great when you output your JSON. You get a quick measurement of it, and then you can see it, how big it grows. It gives you those quick metrics to say, am I writing a class-based reusable style sheet system? It finds all your color values and media queries for you, so you don't have to hunt and peck around or squeeze the browser and take a little notes. It's all right there. And also just a little bit of a witch hunt on your importance declarations. Cons, that's possibly not a full picture of the site. Again, we compiled all of our CSS into one file. Perhaps I'd want to just have, if I'm using the Zurb Foundation framework, that's what's great about this tool. It's a local tool. I could just recompile to only just have our theme settings and just take a look at that, because Zurb Foundation, I can't really control how they're writing their CSS or improving it. But I have full control over mine, so you might want to just portion that off. The downside of Parker is it was last updated in July of 2016, and so that led me to say, is there something a little bit more modern out there? Again, still a great tool though. But I came across Analyze CSS. Sounds very familiar, right? Checks the size, because it's pretty much the same tool. Go to GitHub, install with NPM, measures local or remote, outputs JSON. I'm not going to go as deep into Analyze CSS as I did for Parker, but the metrics are pretty close, but it gives you more options. Again, in my slides, I have links, so you can check it out. Their GitHub page goes through all these metrics really well. But the thing that I really like about Analyze CSS is that it has this offenders list. So this tells you that super long specific CSS rule. So you can just go to that portion and say, what is going on here? Why are we completely controlling all the CSS in here? Can we make it more reusable and less specific? Very similar pros and cons to Parker. But wait, there's a newer tool, fairly brand new. At the end of the year, there's a project called Project WALLACE. It's a style sheet and analysis tool, but what's cool about it, there's two different options. There's an online option, so you go to their site and you give them their info. And the gentleman, I follow him on Twitter, haven't spoken with him, but the maker of Project WALLACE does a pretty good job about privacy and gathering. He's very sensitive to gathering this information, but what it does is it's an online visual tool. So as you can see, the other tools were command line and outputting these numbers. He's just done a really good job of making them reports and fancy reports. So there's also a command line to output JSON as well. But it's a pretty cool site. I want to explore it a little bit more, and this talk may evolve as I get more into it. So next up, so enough of those tools, I just want to talk briefly about Lint. If you're not using Lint, you should be. CSS linting is an amazing, amazing thing. It helps your team write really good code. It doesn't, actually, let me correct that. It doesn't help you write code if you implement Lint right. It makes you write better code. So CSS is great. Linting for JavaScript can be a little challenging if you're not using like Grunt or Yarn to compile all your JS, but on our teams for code reviews, we use an online lint to just make sure that we're writing good JavaScript. I'm going to go quickly through some REFACTOR pro tips. Again, as you audit, as you're looking at all this stuff, it might be a really good time to organize your CSS. Atomic design for the win, smack structure. Maybe it's a good time to implement BEM, you know. Other things, again, those tools were really great to bust out all your color variables for SASS. You can write some really good variables, mix-ins to make things more reusable and more consistent throughout your theme. JavaScript, definitely be using Drupal behaviors. Always use Drupal behaviors. There's some great article at the end, Lullabot article, that's really great about using Drupal behaviors. And also, yay for D8, only load JavaScript when you need it. So if you have a complex component, that's a great time to refactor them. So what did all these tools do? I alluded to you can output JSON, right? But ultimately, after you audit it, you've done all that work. What you want to do is you want to benchmark that and then measure it over time. So what I'm proposing is adding a metrics folder in every theme. And so what you can do is take that output from Project WALLACE sprint by sprint. So all you have to do is you can add this as part of your automation tasks and just run it through Parker or command line tool. Output that JSON and just put it right in your theme. So that way, nobody in here has probably gotten that call that the home page is slow, right? When did that occur? Well, perhaps if we use these metrics, we can see that the size of the CSS file doubled over the last sprint because we did an integration. So by measuring this over time, you're able to see and track and go back and have better answers for what's going on. Also see your improvements. So not only can you export the JSON and put it there, why not just add like a TXT file called theme metrics? And again, sprint by sprint, measure the homepage load time. Use Lighthouse. There's alley scores as well. So for accessibility, you know, your site might not be accessible now. You can automate these things, put them in this folder, and track it over time. So measuring tells us where we've been and gives us clues on how to improve. And these tools definitely do that. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. There's mid.camp 231. Please rate my session, and I'm available for questions. Here's the references. Again, online. Any questions about the tools? Yeah.
So if I understood correctly, Parker can only look at one CSS file at a time?
No, you can, sorry if that was up there, I didn't update my slide.
I might have just misunderstood.
That's okay. I was incorrect. I've given this presentation before and I thought it was only for one file, but you can do multiples.
Sort of get an aggregate for your whole theme.
Yes. So there's ways to go to multiples and pull them all together. Yeah.
So what sort of like gains did you see after you did this? Like not in terms of necessarily speed, but like I know you did this on a specific project, like how much stuff did you tear out and fix?
It's in progress. The question was how, I'll rephrase it, but how did this help me with the project I was on? I've been on a project and it's grown over it's coming up on 4 years. And in my gut, I just had a feeling things were getting a little large. So when I ran it, I was like, it is really large. But I couldn't say what tipped me over that edge, if it was just like a slow trickle that's gonna just fill up the bathtub, you know? So that's what got me thinking about this project and outputting it and measuring over time, is because I didn't have a good answer for it. But in the end, it allowed me to go through and say, oh, there's certain content types that we don't use anymore on this project, so we could just take all that CSS out. So I'm backing things out like 20K at a time. Also, some things that were done rather quickly, I would redo and make them more reusable. So we established a pattern, repeated it, and didn't really go back and optimize for what we were doing. So that's how I saw this. But again, having a benchmark is always good, because hopefully you never have to look at it, but it's there if you need it. Another question.
Is there something that helps visualize these metrics?
So it's JSON, so you probably could put it through something, but that project WALLACE that I'm still exploring, their online looks really good, so check out the link at the end. But it is more visual. But there probably is a good way that you could take the JSON and run it through a report. JSON's great. Yes, another
It's a comment
question.
rather than a question, but it just occurs to me that this data would be really helpful for me anyway, for estimating, styling tasks that I get assigned, because I've been, I'm a good estimator generally when I'm working on the back end and everything else, but with styles, I always shoot myself in the foot. And I think I'm always amazed how like one task, like doing something on one site that's very clean and very streamlined is so much faster, and then you get onto a site where there's just really high specificity and you're just in a war. And that's like where you use your whole weekend to some task that took you like a half an hour on another site. And it's really hard to explain that to management. And it's also just really hard to come up with realistic estimates. But I think if you could really just look at this data, you could be like, okay, this site is messed up. I'm going to just quadruple this estimate.
Yeah. To summarize, as I knock everything over, it's a great tool to possibly help estimate and again see what's going on. Sometimes, I'm guilty of it. I write really specific rules. When I write a style and then something's overwriting it, I'm like, I'm just going to specify the heck out of this certain thing. And it shows. It shows in bloat. It shows in complexity of what's going on. And it's not reusable. Somebody's like, oh, I really like that button you did on that form. I'm like, good luck trying to pull that thing out of there. Because it's in the header, it's in this form, and it's for this form. I wrote all those specific tasks for it. So yeah, Audit's a great time to slow down and say, everybody should get this button. What is this button called? Is it a reversible button? That, again, I think it's a great tool.
What about identifying unused classes?
That's a great question. It doesn't. The question was, what about unused classes? I don't know of these tools that I've explored so far, if it's a way to say, hey, this is dead weight. That's why at the beginning of the project I was talking about content types and analytics reports to kind of find out what's not used anymore. So that's how I would solve that mystery, but I don't have a way of running the CSS to say this isn't used in the markup. If somebody knows of a good tool, I think there might be an audit tool that does that, but I don't know of one that tells you, hey, all this CSS is not used in your site. Get rid of it. I think we're at time. I'm happy to talk. You can tell I'm really excited about these tools. Thanks so much. Rate my session. Thanks.